Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Audience Podcast. And in today's episode, we're going to talk a little bit about when is the correct time to let a client's dog off, or even your own dog, for that fact. And this sort of topic's come about because previously I've just seen on the social media that a trainer had asked. So I don't know how the story came about or why he asked the question. So I don't know the direct story behind it. But obviously, this trainer had asked the question, asking dog walkers, professional dog walkers, to respond to this question. And the question was, how do you decide when to let somebody else's dog off the lead? Like, what are the requirements? How do you decide when it is safe to let somebody else's dog off, or what the requirements are? Because from what I'd pieced together in the question, that he had said that he's had quite a few clients come to him purely because the dogs have been let off lead while out with the dog walker, and they've buggered off and they've started chasing deer and or other wildlife. And obviously it's got I'm assuming that the dog walker has had to get in touch with the owner, say, look, your dog's pissed off after a bloody deer, you're gonna have to come and help me find it, blah 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 blah. So now obviously this dog's got a taste for chasing deer, and all these things have happened. So now he's come forward with this question, basically not attacking dog walkers in any way, shape or form. He was genuinely curious and asking the question, when is the correct time, or how do you decide, what steps do you take as a professional dog walker to decide when it's time to let somebody else's dog off? Like, because they're not your dogs at the end of the day. You are looking after somebody else's dog, and how that dog is going to act with the owner is going to be very different to how it could act with you. It might not have the same boundaries, it might not have the same level of communication with you as it does with the owner. So things can change. These are all things that, as a professional dog walker, that I spend a lot of time trying to pick up on and go through with the owners and decide, what sort of level the dog is going to be at. And personally, I think there are far too many dog walkers. I mean, it's not a bad thing, but they are far too trusting of other people's dogs. When you don't spend every single second of the day with them, or every single moment with them dogs, you're not going to see every little aspect of it. So some of the times it is a little bit like guesswork. So when I take my two dogs out and I spend all day with them, I go on so many walks with them, I will know all their little subtle cues, when they're picking up on scents, when they're doing certain things, when they've spotted something. And because I'm with these guys so much, like my dogs, that I will pick up on it, and I could be like, hey, cut that out. We're not doing that. And these are things that will all get missed when it comes to a client's dog. And I think it's a valid question, what this trainer was asking, what are the requirements? So in this episode, I kind of quickly want to go over what sort of step-by-step process that I take, me personally, when I'm taking on a brand new dog. Sometimes you just know, I've been doing this quite a few years now, and when you meet a dog for the first time, so basically this all comes down to your first ever consultation. When you go outside with the dog and the owner, it will give you such a good read on what that dog's going to be like. Because what I found the majority of the time is that people, clients, some of the clients that I've got, and general public, they think their dog is far better trained than it actually is when it comes to certain levels for certain things. I think they seem to think that because this dog will recall at an empty park, or just when there's nothing happening, that the dog will recall every single time, and that is just absolutely not the case. So I want to share with you guys exactly how I do it, my sort of step-by-step process, and how I vet them, and how we do all sorts of different things with them. So first of all, I'd like to say that sometimes you do get a dog, like I say, I've been doing this quite a few years now. You sometimes get a dog and you just know that this dog isn't going to go anywhere. It's just not got that. It's not got that instinct. It's not got that prey drive. It's just so chilled out and relaxed. It might be a little bit older. It might just not even have any interest. I've taken on a few dogs, and I know within the first two walks that the dog is going to be quite safe off lead. But obviously, when I let these guys off, I usually do this. I still follow the same steps. Even though I know for a fact that they're not really going to go anywhere. They're too human dependent. They do like to just stay close by. And then sometimes I will take a dog on and they'll be like, oh yeah, he won't go anywhere. And the dog is an absolute nightmare to handle. Like there's such a wide variety. So I do understand his question, like saying what sort of situations and what's the requirement for you guys to let a dog off. So for me personally, I do, like I said before, I do a step-by-step process. So I will go on the consultation with the owner and the dog, and I will see what they're like. Because if the owner's there and they let the dog off, it's still the owner's responsibility to take care of that dog. If it buggers off, the owner's there. It's their responsibility. If they turn up to a meet and greet, and I'll be like, right, so are you gonna let the dog off, and we're gonna see what its recall's like and stuff like that, and they sort of like, and ah about it, and they think, I'm not really sure about, letting him off up here. I'm not sure if it's the best situation for the dog. And like, I take dogs on to go on to the moors to do walks, so they need to be reliable off lead, because all sorts could pop up. If they're like that, for me personally, I'd be like, I don't think it's going to work out. I think you should maybe look at other dog walkers or other options, basically. Because like, if they turn up to the moors and they'll be like, yeah, no, I don't think I can let my dog off up here, I'm scared it won't come back, then there is absolutely no way, shape or form that I'm going to take that dog on and even consider letting it off lead anywhere. Do you know what I mean? So that's like your first base, that's your first step to decide, so you sort of reading the client here to see what they're thinking about their own dog. And then if they do let it off and they say the recall's bob on and they start recalling it and the dog's pissing around in the distance, stuff like that, again, the dog's not going to recall to the owner. It's probably not going to recall to you either. It's too invested in something else or what it's doing. That's like very early signs. So like what they'll do is, so like, say if the dog does come back, like the dog does recall and it comes back and it sits with him, that's all good signs. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to do the same. I'm not going to do that whatsoever. So I'll be like, right, the dog's recalling, it's not too bad, but it is pretty quiet, there's nobody here. So like, we'll go on a walk and hopefully we'll come into contact with maybe something in the distance, whether it be another dog or another walker, a runner, a cyclist, and I would then like to see how well they're going to do. If we don't have these opportunities arise, then we don't have these opportunities arise. This is what we have other tools for. So that's the first step. You're doing your client consultation, you're doing your meet and greet and your walk and talk, and you're seeing what the dog's operating like in that environment with the owner around. So next step is obviously if you decide to take on that dog and you'll be like, yeah, it seems all right, we're going to be okay. So I will explain to my client at this point that I'm not going to let that dog off lead at all on that first walk. It will get to go on a long line. That's probably as far as we go. It's very, very, very rare that I will ever let a dog completely have free rein or off lead in our first walk, because I have not spent enough time with that dog to know any of its quirks, any of its signals, any of its cues, and the dog has not spent enough time with me to build any sort of connection or trust. Even though some dogs are very like trusting to start off with, it's just not something that I want to do. I don't just want to let them off from the get-go. So the next step there is I take on the client. I'll explain to them that obviously they're probably not going to get off a long line at all in this first walk. So I will take them and I will walk them on a short lead, and I will see how the dog is operating on a short lead when it's close to me. Because obviously the further out the dog gets, the more distracted it's going to be by other things. So like the way I like to think of it is the further the dog is away is basically the less control you're going to have to get that dog back, because you become less motivating when the dog gets further away. There's more sense, more smells, more stuff to do. So I will start the dog off on a short, normal lead or leash. I will start off on a normal line and I will see how we're doing. If it's scrambling like knackers and trying to get to pull to everything, there's no connection between me or the dog there. There's absolutely nothing. It's scrambling around. It's not listening to me. So there's still no way, shape or form I will let that dog off lead if it's behaving like that. If you cannot get that dog to walk nicely to heel, or even at the bare minimum pay attention to you, you're going to stand no chance when it's further out. So we will see how we get on. If the dog's paying attention and it's a little bit engaged with me and I'm building engagement, I'm doing a little bit of close attention recall, a bit of work, a bit of sit, a bit of heel, all these sorts of little things. If they're doing that, then I will maybe give them a bit of a longer long line. I've got like 5, 10, 15, 30 meter long lines and stuff like that. So I will put them on like a 5, 10 meter long line, and I will give them a bit of distance, a bit of freedom. So there are occasions where if a dog is on a short line and it's next to you, it could be getting frustrated. It could be getting a little bit antsy, a little bit anxious. It might just be pent up because it hasn't had this kind of exercise. So you've got to remember, this could be a new area. It's a new person. There's new dogs, new smells, new stimuluses. The dog could be over aroused. It could be excited. So actually being able to get that dog's attention on a short line might not work very well. So you might even want to start with a long line. Again, it all depends on the dog and reading the situation. So say we get them on a long line, we'll let that dog have a bit of freedom, a bit like 5-10 meter space to have a bit of a trot around, a bit of a sniff, a bit of a play, do its business. And then on a long line, I will walk backwards, call the dog, give it a recall, get it to come to me, build a little bit of engagement, a bit of excitement there about it coming back to me. Now, these are just things that you should be doing with client dogs. This is something that everybody everywhere always should be doing with their own dog. Like, your own dog is no different to this, like the same process. I took the same steps when training my dogs, to be fair. So on the long line with the dog, doing a bit of recall, a bit of engagement, seeing how it's acting. Again, I will give it a little bit more line if we've got the space to do so. And we will then, so we've got like say 20 meters now, let the dog get to the end of line if it wants to. If it's not doing it, it's just coming back, then that's all good signs. We're on the right track. But if it's like still at the end of the line, it's still trying to pull and it's engaged with absolutely everything else around you except for you, that's not a good sign, and there is no way that you should be letting that dog off lead. So I'll recall the dog, get it back. We'll do basic work. So it's a very simple step-by-step process. Like I say, client consultation, see how the dog's behaving. Short line, longer line, and then a long line. And we will do all these sorts of things within the first walk, but they still won't get off that long line because I still don't feel personally like it's connected to me. We've only had 45 minutes to an hour of engagement and just seeing what the dog's like. What I'm like, what the dog's like with me. Is it engaging? Is it food motivated? Is it toy motivated? Is it motivated by chasing other things? There's not enough time in that one singular walk to get all these things pinned, which is why when I teach people to do dog walking, I highly recommend that you do like maybe a 2-week minimum trial. So you have a trial period, and the client signs in. You explain to the client, obviously within your contracts and stuff when you've met them, that you're going to have a 2-week trial period. We'll take the dog on for 2 weeks. We'll see how we get on. If the dog is nowhere near ready, or if it's going to be a handful, it's going to cause disruption to the other dogs, or it's just not suitable for the groups in general, you've got a 2-week trial there to have a little bit of an out, to say, look, I don't think it's going to work. You might want to look at other options, other dog walkers, and see what other options you've got. So you absolutely definitely should have like a 2-week trial within place, just as a backup, just to say like, look, it's not going to work out. But again, 2 weeks is enough time for you to sort of get a really good feel on what this dog's going to be like. So you'll pick them up for their second walk, hopefully, and then you can do the same again, straight back onto a long line, see how it's engaging with the dog, see how it's engaging with you. And if there is an absolute safe place, a secure place that you can let them off after quite a few walks on the long line to see how the dog's engaging with you, or again, only if the dog is engaging with you and it's not showing signs of buggering off, and it's like recalling every single time and it's quite solid, only then and only then should you actually ever let that dog off. Ideally, let that dog off in a safe place where it can't actually get to anybody else, or it can't escape or run away or chase anything. And I would then give that dog a bit of a trial off lead to see how we get on. Okay, that's how I would go about it. So like over the time now, like I say, I've got quite a few dogs on the books. I'm fully booked, and pretty much I think like 99% of my dogs can all get off lead in the malls. But there are some places like I would not, like my dogs, my personal dogs, I would take up to our local malls, and even if there were sheep about, I would still have control. There is absolutely no way that I would ever let a client dog off around sheep, ever. Period. Not done. Because that's just common sense. You don't know what the dog's going to be like. You don't want to run the risk. So it all goes down to go inside with this. You kind of need to look at like the risk assessment. Whenever you go to a new area or what you're doing, you should always be risk assessing the area. I talk about this quite a bit. Risk assessments. Like you need to decide, is it safe for the dog to come off lead? Like what's it motivated by? Could there be a potential for rabbits? Could there be a potential for deer? Could there be a potential for anything? Does this dog chase birds? And if it does chase birds, then where's it going to end up if it doesn't stop chasing birds? I've got quite a few spaniels that love to chase birds. But fortunately for me, they've got quite good recall and they do come back and they call off a bird. Again, these are things that you should be testing when the dog is on a long line. Like say when I've got the spaniels on a long line and we were going, if they took off after a bird, I would recall them off the bird. And if they come back to me, then we would practice that in repetitions. If they didn't, then it's not looking ideal, is it? You're not going to be able to get them back off a bird. But the problem isn't the chasing the birds exactly. It's like if they chase a bird and then they chase another bird, and then all of a sudden a deer pops out and they start chasing this deer, and then the deer hops a wall and the dog goes under the fence and over the wall and it ends up in a field with sheep and it starts ending up on the road and sheep are going, farmer turns up. You see what I mean? It's just a train of thought and it's just not worth getting into it. So you need to do complete risk assessments. What is going to be up here? Can they get out? What's going to happen at the worst if they get out? You know, and all these sorts of things need to be crossing your mind whenever you're letting anybody's dog off. So I've got quite a few dogs that are just like so reliable. Like they're not that way inclined. They're not there to chase, things like that. And when I'm walking in the moors, I always I do a 360. I look around. I make sure that I can't see anybody else or anybody's dogs. Because if there are other members of the public and lots of dogs, there's very few dogs that I would let off. Not because they'll run up to the other people or the members of the public, just because I want to have control over the dogs. I want to be respectful of everybody else and how they're doing things, and I want to show that I actually have control. And as like a professional business, I want to give dog walkers a good name. We can't be just having dog walkers running up left, right, and centre. Do you know what I mean? So I keep these guys on lead if there are a lot of people around, and we will do more of a hike walk if it's. So if the guys are staying on a little bit of a closer line, then we'll do hike walks. So we'll climb a lot of hills, so that the dogs are getting a good level of exercise there. So yeah. Yeah, so you need to be risk assessing every single area that you go to and make sure it's completely safe. The places that I tend to go now, I generally know what I'm going to be expecting. I don't go to new places every single time. If I did go to a new place, the same steps would be involved, like long lines, short lines, recall practice. All these sorts of things are still going to be involved. But for the majority of the time, because I go to quite a lot of the regular places, I know what to expect. But you still never know. There could always be something that could get under a fence or end up through the gate that shouldn't be there. So I always try to make sure, one of my criteria is that I always make sure that I've got good line of sight. Like, I'm not just going to let them off in the woods where I can't see jack. You know, I want to make sure that I've got a good line of sight. I can see everything around me. I can have a good 360 visual view to make sure that nobody's going to crop up on me. And then again, I will only let the most reliable dogs off lead if they're in this area, and I'll sort of just keep an eye out on everything and practice recall, and I try to make sure that the dogs are close by. Again, I talked about this in like one of my very, very early shorts or one of my other videos on YouTube, that one of my requirements for letting dogs off is that when I'm just stood still, is that the dogs will hover around, you know, just sort of like they're hovering around with me, they're following my footsteps, they're following my lead. That is ideally one of the situations that you want to be in, where the dogs are just sort of hovering around you and just following suit, basically. So I mean, that's basically it. There isn't, it's not like super complex or what you do. It's just the basics. You've just got to risk assess your area, make sure it's safe to do so. If there is any sign that it's not safe to let these dogs off, just don't let them off. Don't let them off. And then, so that's one of my criterias. The other criteria is that we do a step-by-step process, like I said at the start, that we start from client consultation. We see how the dog is performing with the owner, if it's recalling, if it's not recalling. If it's not recalling at all and it's going to be a handful, don't take the dog on. Very simple. It's not ready to be off lead in the moors. The owner hasn't done the work. It's not safe to do so. Step after that, you take it for a walk. You see how it's engaging with you on a short line. Is it heeling? Is it scrambling? Is it pulling? Is it even listening to its name? Does the dog even know its bloody name? If it is a little bit tense, a little bit anxious, a little bit stressed, I would then put it on a longer line just to give it that little bit of freedom, just to relax a little bit and see how you go from there. And again, it's like I said before, it's very rare that I will let that dog completely off lead on the first walk. So these are all my criteria that need to be met. They must be able to recall. If they have a high drive, they must be able to recall off something. Like if you see a dog in the distance, or a cyclist or a runner or anything like that, if a dog sees it, the dog must be able to recall away. It's got to be able to recall away. If it can't recall away from basic things, again, the dog is not ready to be off lead. Another criteria is that you should be able to recall dogs off play. When the dogs are chasing each other, they get a little bit lost. They get a little bit giddy, the adrenaline goes, they get a little bit louder, their ears switch off. You must be able to recall them dogs, which is why I use a whistle for the most part. You must be able to call that dog or a group of dogs off play, off chase, when if they're all scenting and if they're all scenting and running around, or if they are all playing. You must be able to call them off. You must be able to recall all of these dogs. That's another criteria. And then the last sort of criteria that should really be met is if the dog is engaging. It's all right getting them to recall off things or walk nicely on a lead and stuff like that. You need to get that dog to engage with you. If it's not engaging with you and its ears are switched on, there's a very good chance it's going to ignore you because you are somebody new. Like, I've got a few dogs that only go maybe once or twice a week. These dogs are actually the most tricky dogs. I do know some other dog walkers that do a 2-walk minimum. To be fair, for my clients, some of my clients, they only go into an office like 1 day a week, so they just need me for 1 day. But ideally, if you could get like a 2-walk minimum in a contract, so they go with you twice a week, it does work out better for the dog's engagement with you and the other dogs. They don't get too overstimulated too easy. But yeah, so one of my other criteria is that the dog has some level of engagement. If it's got no engagement with it, if it just ignores you, dog doesn't come off lead. So they've got to be able to do a few of these things. There has to be engagement, there has to be recall, there has to be behaviours that are all good. You have to risk assess things, and if you cannot do all of these things and make sure it is safe to do so, then the dog should not be off lead. There are far too many people going into the malls just letting their dogs off lead and hoping for the best. It's a wing and a prayer. It's like, oh, well, they recalled once, in a park, and now I think they're ready. Absolutely not. Dogs, for the most part, do not generalise behaviour. Just because they've recalled in a dog pen when there's fuck all around, doesn't mean that they're going to recall for you when there's rabbits or deer running around. Do you know what I mean? And these things can pop out from anywhere, especially where we live. So there's got to be these criterias, and they've got to be met. Otherwise, you just don't let the dog off because it's not safe to do so. So I think that's pretty much going to cover it for this episode. Like I say, the guy that proposed the question, it was a very valid question. Like, do you know what I mean? What criteria do you meet to let other people's dogs off the lead? Because you don't have that same level of connection. So I completely get his concerns, and I completely get the question itself. So I just thought it was a really good idea to put a podcast out on what sort of criterias that I would look for, or what I personally do. Like I say, it's all about engagement. It's all about that level of, letting the dog have more freedom over time and letting them come back to you. And again, like for a lot of the dogs that I walk, they could stay on the long line for like a good couple of weeks to the end of the trial walk. Like maybe they would get off, depending on how many walks they've had within the trial period. Do you know what I mean? They might only get off lead in the last one to see how well they've actually bonded with you and how well they're going to go. And even then, it's not 100%. There's pretty much no time that a dog is ever going to be an absolute 100% perfect all of the time, every single walk off lead. New areas, new things, new smells, new dogs can always lead to a little bit of overstimulation, which means their ears switch off. My Labrador now, we've done so much training with the lad. It's very rare that he even ever goes on a lead. Like he pretty much just free roams the entire time. But we do work on engagement, recall, heel work. He's got to be able to sit on cue. He's got to be able to heel on cue. These kind of things. If he couldn't do this, we wouldn't have him off lead. But even still, if we go to somewhere completely new, when we travel or when we go camping, he can still get a little bit full of it. He can get a little bit. He's still a young entire male. He's full of testosterone. He's full of beans all the time. But yeah, so he can still lose it. So we will go through the same process. If it's somewhere there's going to be a lot of people and I'm a little bit concerned, we'll long line him to let him until he's calmed down and I've got a little bit of engagement. But again, number one rule for me is letting dogs off whenever we go anywhere is engagement. If a dog's not engaging, then they can't come off. If they've got no recall, then they can't come off. If there's potential for something to be there that shouldn't be and you're worried about it, they should not come off. Never think that a dog's just going to recall to you just because you've got a biscuit in your pocket. It's just not the reality of the situation. And I think that's pretty much going to wrap it up for this episode, guys. Thank you for tuning in. Again, any questions, any comments, please leave them down below. Any topics you want discussed, leave them down below as well, and I will add them to the list. So again, thank you so much, guys, for tuning in. And I will catch you all in the next episode.